short history lesson. 2,500 years ago, that's where we'll start. 2,500 years ago, the ancient Israelites were taken into captivity by the ruling power who came in and sacked their cities, the Assyrians. And then a few years later, the Assyrians were conquered by the Babylonians, and the Babylonians again reconquered the ancient Israelites. And so this has been, and they took everybody off into exile. All of the ancient Israelites were taken off into exile. And this has been an event that, quite apart from whatever the conflict is in the Middle East today, that the ancient Israelites have never recovered from. They have never, since that time, 2,500 years ago, been returned to their homeland. Well, the experience of exile is nothing new, is it? History seems to be filled with people of all kinds, rulers, princes, peoples in general, who have been exiled from their land because somebody else was more powerful, somebody else had more resources, somebody else desired it. Perhaps some of us, at one time or another, have found ourselves someplace where we didn't belong, someplace away from home, someplace that wasn't our own, someplace uncomfortable, someplace unfamiliar. Now, we didn't do anything to get there, but powers outside of our control have put us there. Though I suspect that for most of us, we haven't had to spend too much time in these places. Soon enough, we are returned to the comforts of our own space and the familiar smells and experiences of our own lives. Well, this is not the case for those who have experienced deportation or who have been refugees. This is not the case for Canada's Native peoples, who were forced into residential schools. Instead, these people have had to endure years and years of exile from their own land, from their own culture, from their own people. I imagine that in many respects, the experience of Canada's Native peoples isn't too far different than the experience of the ancient Israelites when the Babylonians came along and conquered them and took them off into years and years of exile. And in those years of exile, the people of God lost hope. And so God sent a number of prophets to come to speak to them his word that would reassure them and strengthen them in their time of distress. And Isaiah is one of those prophets. And Isaiah comes to the people, to this people that was being ruled by puppet leaders who were in league with the Babylonian power, to a people whose holy city had been ransacked, to a people where the temple, which is where they worshiped, which was the center of their entire lives and where they understood God to live, had been demolished, crumbled to the ground. And since the city and the temple were gone, the people lost every means of practicing their own religious and cultural ways. They found themselves with an annihilated culture. They were forbidden from engaging in their usual customs and practices. Their language was under threat. They weren't allowed to own land, which meant that they had no livelihood. Their faith was in doubt, and they were without hope that God would hear them and would rescue them and would live with them. And so along comes Isaiah to this desolate place. Can you imagine this desolate place? Have any of you been in such a desolate place? A place where you don't speak the language, a place where you can't get a job, afraid that your wife will be taken to be one of the many wives of some important person and added to his harem, afraid that your husband and your sons will be conscripted into a foreign army and placed on the front lines of hand-to-hand battle, afraid of having children at all, lest they be taken into slavery. The Israelites lived day in and day out among a people who believed that their own gods, these cast images made of wood and metal, ordered the events of their lives. They began to think that the God who brought them up out of Egypt had forgotten about them. Surely this is a place without hope. Surely this is a place without a future. Surely this is a place without a present worth living for. You can hear the cry of desperation in their voices. If you read through the Psalms, you will hear it. How long, Lord, will you forget us? How long will you leave us desolate? How long will you let our enemies triumph over us? You have cut me off from the land of the living. I am too tired to plead with you anymore. I am swallowed up in despair. I wish I'd never been born. And Isaiah says to this people, comfort, comfort my people. Have comfort, my people, because God has heard your prayers. In fact, God has never been very far from you. God has kept you in the palm of his hands, even though it hasn't looked like it. Comfort, oh comfort your people. Isaiah reminds the people of Israel that if they remember God's saving work in their lives, they will witness the power of the creator of the universe and have their strength renewed and their hopes fulfilled. In essence, Isaiah asks them to remember what they already know. Here's the rhetorical question. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Have you not understood? This question forces them to respond with the positive answer. Of course they have. Of course they've known this. Of course they've heard this. Of course they've seen God's work. And what they have known and what they have seen literally makes a world of difference. Isaiah reminds the people that an idol can do nothing. It can't even make noise. There's a passage, I've forgotten exactly where it is in the Bible, but a passage that in Hebrew translates that the idols that they make can't even go, They can't even grunt. They're made of wood and metal. Instead, it is God, Yahweh, the God who brought them up out of exile, brought them through the Red Sea, brought them into the Promised Land. This is the God who created the heavens and the earth. Our passage from Isaiah reminds us that this is the God who created the stars, in fact, who is above the stars, and the moon and the sun, who created the waters. It's the same God who called Israel to be his people. It's the same God who made a covenant to be faithful to them despite anything they could do. The God who created the universe is the same God who brings rulers to nothing, blows them away with a puff of his breath. He is the everlasting God. He is the God whose limitless dimension of power means that no moment in history is ever outside of his control, regardless of how it appears. On the other hand, human power is limited. Human power will fall away. The only thing human power can do is make things with its hands that eventually rot. Human power can't create stars or the moon or the foundations of the earth. Human strength fades and ebbs away. All human power can do is set up an idol on a pole and tell people to look at it. How ridiculous is that? But Yahweh, the God of the people of Israel. Now here's a God who can do something. Here's a God who can create out of nothing. Here's a God who can send rulers into the sea with a mere word. Remember this God, because this God's strength never fails. And those who wait upon this God will have their own strength renewed and restored in times of even the deepest distress and darkness. Have you not known this God? Have you not heard this word, the creating and saving word of the God of the universe? Of course you have, you silly people, says Isaiah. Isaiah argues that the only way out of this place of homelessness and hopelessness and despair is in remembering the God who saved them from their enemies, the God who created the universe, the God who called them by name. Idols are not going to help you now. Worshipping them will only enslave you more than you already are. Depend upon the supremacy of God. And trust the fact that even though you can't worship in the temple anymore, God is still with you. Even though you can't practice the customs, the things that you were familiar with, the places where you used to meet God, God is still with you. The gods of the other nations have not gotten the better of Yahweh. Hope and trust with confidence in what you know and in what you have heard. God will not let you down. So, what does Isaiah say to us in our times of exile? I think he says the same thing. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Of course you have, you silly people. Hope and trust with confidence in what you have known and have heard. God is more powerful than those who hold power over you. Life can make a new start because the God who keeps creation together. Can you imagine that if God was not sustaining creation, that it would fall apart, literally? Stars would fall out of the sky. The earth would lose its cohesion, fall apart. Now, I have to admit, though, that when I have been in times of despair, my own kinds of exile, when I'm in the wrong place, I feel out of place, that hearing somebody spear off some pious platitudes about trusting in God's power hasn't been particularly helpful. Yes, I know it's true that God is more powerful than my circumstances. I know that. I know that God is a God who has demonstrated his faithfulness throughout history and continues to do so. I know that. But when it comes to the particular and specific moments of exile in my own life, emotional exile, or psychological exile, or physical exile, or spiritual exile, when it comes to these moments, this knowledge hasn't given me much comfort. And the reason it hasn't given me much comfort is because I have a very short memory. And I'm not very good at sitting around and trusting God. I'm not good at patiently waiting for God to do his God thing. I'm not good at actively and expectantly hoping in God. What I am good at is coming up with a plan of action and implementing my plan of action. I've come to realize, though, that being a woman of action in these kinds of times is really just me thinking that I'm more powerful than God. And how arrogant is that? It's really me thinking that if God isn't going to show up on my schedule and fix things according to my plan, then I'll do it myself. You guys ever felt like that? I'm not good at remembering what I already know. I have a very bad memory for the way that God has worked in my own life and in the history of the world. It isn't the gods of my own making that are going to help me when I'm lost, or heartsick, or in despair. It is the God of creation that will attend to me. And I know this because he has proven himself faithful in creation and history. So I think we all need to hear and heed the words of Isaiah. Have you not known? Have you not heard? He's not calling us to remember just any God. He's calling us to remember a specific God. Not the gods of the Babylonians, not the gods of our world, the gods of capitalism or consumerism or a host of other isms that promise that if you bow down to them, they will lift you up and give you everything you want. These gods are impotent. They can't even grunt. But rather it is the God of creation who tends to you, even you who were made a little lower than the angels. The same God who holds creation together holds you together and me together. The same God who is from everlasting to everlasting is with you now, in this moment, right now, in this place, in your mornings and your evenings, in your going out and your coming in your lying down and your rising up. Mark knew what Isaiah was talking about. In our scripture lesson this morning, we hear that he recounts the story of Jesus healing many diseases and curing many people and saving people from demons. Once again, God demonstrates that in Jesus Christ, he has the power over all creation to heal, to cure, to make whole again. He has the power to bring those who were outcast, in exile, back into community. He gives them a home with him. He gives a new home to those who had lost their own, and he gives people a home who never had a home. He remembers, brings back into membership those who have been dismembered. So instead of sitting around and waiting for God to show up, let's understand that waiting isn't a neutral activity. It actively hopes and behaves as though the promises are already fulfilled. It looks to God, who demonstrates that in and through Jesus, the newness of life is possible, and transformation of all kinds can and does happen, because God is the source of all power. Life can make a new start wherever you are, because the God who keeps creation together and who has sent out his word to bring us home, this God acts. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Of course we have. Of course we have. Actively remember what you have known and heard, and trust that this God is more powerful than anything our lives can throw at him or us. Remember what you have known and heard, and be confident that you will be and that you are remembered into God's family.